come into my house at any given moment, you would most likely see a crazy mix of English and Spanish, and that's just the reality of it. A lot of people would argue that at some point, is it even worth it if it becomes such a hassle? And for us, it 100% is. I think that subconsciously some people view that speaking two languages is somewhat of a party trick, but for us, it's not. For our children, it's their inheritance. I'll get into that a little bit later. Being bilingual is not just a gift for you, but it can also be a gift for other people as well. We had the privilege of my husband's grandmother coming to the United States for the first time to visit back in December, and she doesn't speak any English. So to have my children be able to have a conversation with her and to have nobody in between that conversation really created a true intimate relationship between great-grandparent and great-grandchild. Both of my older children were able to have a conversation with her that did not require any translation from an outside person. That relationship is obviously, for me, what makes it so worth it. That bridge that's created by speaking the same language is something that is not always accessible or even as intimate as having a translator or somebody to have that conversation for you. After being involved a little bit into the medical world because I'm a doula, I have gotten to see the actual effects of speaking the same language as somebody else. To see a patient's face light up whenever somebody is speaking the same language as them is just so rewarding. And it just makes it so much easier to get optimized care for those people because you're not having to translate through another person to express emotional hurt, emotional desire, physical needs, or anything in between, because you're directly talking to that person to get that direct support from them. In a lot of cases, care is not always translated correctly, first of all, due to some of that stigma of sharing personal information or personal health issues or problems that you may be having with a stranger, for them to then repeat that to another person in their language. But also, sometimes things get lost in translation, and often the care is not at its best because the translation lost exactly what they were trying to say. Their exact symptoms, how they're feeling emotionally, physically, mentally, all of those things can sometimes be lost in translation. By bridging that gap for somebody, you're essentially meeting them where they're at. There's also a paradox, per se, about the ni de aquí ni de allá kind of mentality that provides a separation from finding your roots. For us, we found that that was a no-brainer. Giving our children a place to connect and a people to connect to, essentially we're trying to remove that separation of not being from here and not being from there. It's actually very common for second and third generation immigrants' children to not be able to speak the language that their families speak. So for us, we found it essential to teach our children both English and Spanish. But how do we do that? In a society that doesn't really value teaching another language until middle school or high school, we found that it was important for us to actively be teaching our children the language that they needed to learn. So we have a few non-negotiables in our house in order to help our children learn that language. Number one is that we make sure that we are trying our best to speak 90% to 100% of Spanish at home. When we recognize that we're not speaking enough Spanish at the house, we definitely have Spanish time. During those designated Spanish times, we make sure that our kids are encouraged to speak Spanish, and we, as the parents, only speak in Spanish to them. Even if their response is in English, we continue with that Spanish only. So during that time that it's Spanish only, we do an incentive thing, and if you can get less than 10 points, and the points are not necessarily good, it's that you slip up and you speak in English. If you get less than 10 points, you get a prize of some sort, or you get to do something extra that's fun. It really does help the kids learn. We also, for the most part, watch all of our shows, movies, music, all of that in Spanish. There's occasionally times where we don't, just because they sound a little bit weird in the other language. Aquí tienes tu ropa, dame tu ropa. ¿Qué pasó? So oftentimes that's how we introduce a lot of different basic conversation and just interactive speech outside of just us having conversations with the kids. We also encourage that when we go out and we are having to interact with somebody who speaks Spanish, that we are actively speaking Spanish with those people. So when we go to a Mexican restaurant, if the waiter or waitress is speaking in Spanish, the kids and us are going to speak in Spanish as well. Toma. El chupón, sorry. Because we live in a society where we're at right now that is not an immersive society, meaning we don't have outside interactions with a ton of Hispanics that aren't a part of our family, we have to be extra intentional about how we are immersifying ourselves in our house with Spanish as well as with our family members. So making sure that that's a top priority for us is something that we make sure that we do on a daily basis. Last thing that we do is we utilize as much bilingual material as possible. So I don't know if everybody has heard of this, but the Dolly Parton's Imagination Library is such an amazing tool that we love to use. Children from birth up until age 5 can get a book per month for free. If you go on their website, they have the option of bilingual material, and we love that. Every single book that we get, for the most part, there are a couple here and there that aren't. For the most part, every single book is in English and Spanish for us to read to our children. If you're raising bilingual kids, not just English and Spanish, but if you're raising children to speak more than one language fluently, what are some tips and tricks that you guys have learned or have practiced that seem to have worked? So our family has personally made it a point to be proactive in terms of teaching our children Spanish because we're not always going to have that ability. They're speaking English in their day-to-day lives. When we go to the grocery store, when we go to school, when we go to church, all of those things are in English. So if we're not teaching them Spanish proactively in the home, they're not going to learn it. They're not going to learn it to the extent that they should. So really that's why we have chosen to value speaking Spanish in the home rather than just allowing for them to learn it eventually in school or when they decide that they're old enough to learn. That's not for us. We have really decided as parents that we are going to make it a point to teach that inside of our home and to prepare them for the future so that they can potentially be that bridge for somebody else, or just so that they can have that connection with my husband's side of the family. If you're interested in seeing a bilingual family, bicultural family, learning to cope with that while also being a part of a society that's not built for that, follow along and be a part of our journey.